So tell me, what does Axis Allies North Africa and riding a bicycle after 10 years have in common? Well, both are activities that you never forget how to do. As you'll see shortly, both can be exhausting after an hour, and both physically wound someone trying to use them for the first time. But unlike riding a bicycle, North Africa gets more horrific the closer you look. So why the re-edit then? Well, as called out on my original video by the co-creator of this game, Matt Hyra, we done goofed. Well, I'm in charge, so I done goofed this many times. Why did this happen? I tried doing too many things all at once. I was juggling the Axis Allies video, a full-time job, a trip from Canada to Australia, selling a house, and packing to move, all in a 6-week period. Just look behind me. That was the Board Game Hackers studio. So apologies for the errors in the last video, and my apologies to Renegade Studios. Enjoy the re-edit, everyone. Axis Allies North Africa is a tabletop wargame simulator based in the north of Africa circa 1942. And since Axis Allies hasn't had a serious release in over a decade, it's every World War II Desert Fox dream I've ever had come true. But everything is definitely not how it appears. From imaginary sinkable units, to futuristic remotely detonated mines, to a Mediterranean horror show of a map. Also, there's more. But with all this insanity in the air, it really begs the question, how did this game actually get to production? Players, game creators, board game hackers. In this video, you'll see every misfire, breach jam, and squib load baked into this game right here. How these mess-ups destroy the first-time player experience, and after revealing it all, we ask the question, is this game still worth playing? Hold up. You'll want to stick around for the shocking ending. The cherry on top is we tally the good and the bad at the end of the video. So if you like deep dives like these, hack the algorithm with a thumbs up and a comment below. But first, there's game testers and then there's me, Bones Jones, a master board game hacker. My team and I play, hack, and unlock your game's true potential. We specialize in giving you the tools to bring your masterpiece to life. More info in the link, but for right now, let's take you on a journey back to January 21st, 1942. The German tank commander Rommel and the Italians counterattack near Tobruk. The British, overconfidently, send some forces to the Pacific, leaving themselves vulnerable. Will the Afrika Corps capture Tobruk and Cairo? Or will the British and Americans in Operation Torch crush the Desert Fox 11 months later? Players are thrust into the role of Supreme Commander in this nearly forgotten World War II Mediterranean theater. Logistics and new aspects of tabletop warfare dominate as you manage reinforcements, ammo shortages, retreats, resupplies, flanking maneuvers, and landmines. Both above and below the waves, players vie for control of convoy routes and aircraft positions, all while facing the hidden menace of sea mines. With asymmetric warfare, unique units, and the switch from 6 to 10-sided dice, battles are more historically accurate than ever. Revitalized by Renegade Studios and shaped by community feedback, this North Africa campaign, targeted at experienced A&A fans, offers an unparalleled A&A experience. Take my money. Freaking take it. I own nearly every A&A game, so believe me, when that "your item has shipped" email came in, my imagination went wild. But not everything in this game is a masterpiece, and some parts hit like a sucker punch to the trench foot. Considering all of these atrocious mistakes should have been obvious to spot and even easier to fix in pre-production, yet there they are, ready to ambush your soul mid-game, leaving you stunned and betrayed. Starting with the unit. Let's take this one step at a time. The game's visual appeal is stunning. The box lid flawlessly revives the classic A&A designs, sparking heaps of nostalgia. On my shelf, it's a masterpiece, and when you pop the lid, it doesn't disappoint. Flipping to the back of the box shows gameplay I desperately want to be a part of. The attention to detail is impressive, with historical accuracy that's deeply immersive. Like this British scout car, it's great for hit-and-run tactics, covering long distances, and self-sufficiency. The problem? It's microscopic. It's literally physically impossible to handle. Easy to overlook in gameplay, and God forbid it falls off your table. A complete gameplay miss. A miss like some of their other manufacturing that I won't get into detail about, as this is a pre-order, so I'm sure they'll have their production dialed in soon. Dialed in, like this additional baggie I found in the box. Actually, this baggie is taboo. So taboo, you're not allowed to mix it with all the other units provided in the game. Why? Because Renegade Studios actually listens to their players. They're getting double points here for this one, because this shell-shocked me to death. It's a baggie of extra pieces to fill out the unit ranks of each nationality so that you can play out your own made-up scenarios at their expense. Yes! Thank you. Since the beginning, Axis and Allies rules and gameplay can feel a bit much for new players, with every unit costing, moving, attacking, and defending differently. Oh, don't forget about special abilities. It can be a lot of game to wrap your brain around. But once you do, there is a natural progression for more rules and more special units. And North Africa fills that want directly out of the box, starting with variable setups. Hold up, huge confession here. I totally get the craving for more rules, also more immersion, and more everything. That's why I co-created a 3-in-1 historical event, rule, and tech deck for Axis and Allies World War I 1914. If you're an A&A fan, I feel you. And I've stepped up with some amazing work here. Check the link. There's even a printable version. But back to starting variable setups in North Africa. See, Axis and Allies games always start with a historically accurate setup from a specific date. Like in North Africa, starting on January 21st, 1942, where every piece belongs in a specific location. You've seen those 1 and 5 supply tokens. Units need supplies to attack and defend, adding a strategic layer beyond combat, which I love. But this game dices things up with a bit of variable reinforcements. You select 12 points worth of combat units for the next 3 convoys through the Suez Canal. I like the flexibility. Speaking of purchasing, players can purchase landmines and sea mines, placing them immediately on the board. You can place sea mines almost anywhere the enemy doesn't have combat units. This includes enemy convoys. And landmines are placed along a border in a territory you control or have combat troops in. Sea mines are lethal, with a 30% chance of sinking a ship, while landmines have a 30% chance of turning back up to 3 enemy units without casualties. This includes flanking units. Yes, I know, flanking, which gets a dice advantage during combat. A great addition to this game, but there's a problem. The rules rely on fiction-based mechanics to detonate these mines, and it certainly doesn't match their actual behavior in World War II, which is extremely off-putting and rather bewildering as a new player. I'd hate to call them cheap game mechanics, cause they're not, but their execution sure feels like it. See, every time an enemy naval vessel enters a sea zone with your mine deployed in it, the entire game stops and waits for you to decide if you want to detonate your sea mine against that ship. Like, what? This is World War II, people. Remote detonation isn't a thing, but it gets even worse. If you place a mine in an enemy convoy sea zone, the game lets you wait until the most expensive units show up. Then, not gonna lie, it feels a bit godlike and somewhat slimy, deciding what sinks to the bottom based on what mood I'm in. Landmines work similarly. You can save their detonation for a big invasion. However, this is where things get even more horrifically unrealistic. Yes, placing mines along the border between 2 territories is kind of a built-in organizer, as nations attacking to the west will pass over mines placed for nations attacking to the east, and vice versa. It's actually quite clever. My issues? They really lie with the defending player getting to decide when the landmine goes off. So, what happens if you just conquered a territory with enemy landmines already buried along the borders? Well, in World War II, the answer would be, you do nothing. Cause you have no idea where the mines are. But not in A&A North Africa. No, you instantly know. And not only that, all the mines Bluetooth to your futuristic remote detonator. Realism at its finest.
But I don't want it to be like this. I feel like, at the very least, they should give some reality-promoting context as to why these mines behave the way they do. A more realistic way of handling the mines would have been each enemy invasion faces one detonation roll while encountering a landmine. Then a damage roll if the mine actually went off. It's pretty simple, and feels more like the gamble that mines were in World War II. But there's an even bigger disconnect from reality than remotely detonated mines in World War II, with this strict rule commandment. Unless otherwise specified, you can only have 8 combat units per territory. Break this rule, and you must relocate or destroy those units. The game takes this seriously, but it never justifies it in the context of World War II reality. It feels like either a gimmicky mechanic to prevent snowballing armies from steamrolling North Africa, or to combat territories being too physically congested. Either way, you'd have to assume that the land is just too rough and too barren to support that many troops, thus justifying a territory cap of 8 combat units. And at a glance, I would agree with you, but something later in the video catastrophically debunks this explanation. What you're looking at is where 90% of all games, from new releases to classics, make huge mistakes. It's the guide for placing and handling everything, and where first-time players get started. The rule book. A good rule book should guide you smoothly, answering questions and covering everything from the big picture to tiny details, without confusion or forcing constant rereads. But it's not as easy as it sounds. So how is the rule book for Axis Allies North Africa? Well, it's well worded, professionally laid out, and has what every rulebook should have: matte finish on their pages, so you can actually read the words with the lights on. Quality. First thing in the rulebook, it explains how this game differs from previous Axis Allies games. Very nice.
The rulebook may start out nice, but that's where its niceties stop.
The rulebook doesn't specify if a supply truck can drive a couple of territories, pick up cargo, turn around, and then drive back all in one go. The rulebook starts out great, with the component list and the overall vision for the game. And then, as soon as it gets to turn phases, it drops you directly on your head with savage ferocity. A first-time player's nightmare. A nightmare of constantly feeling like you're catching up to information that the book assumes you already know, and it's only when you finally get to the end of the rulebook that you have enough information and structure to effectively now begin reading the rulebook. I'll admit, this feels vulnerable to say, especially since my studio is filled with this man's work, including War Room and soon-to-be Imperial Borders. But Larry Harris, the legendary designer of almost all Axis Allies games, including the North Africa map, I don't just dislike the map. I think it's a travesty that alienates both first-time players and loyal ANA fans. Yes, that's harsh, but let me explain. At first glance, the map seems inviting, with familiar territories stretching from the Sahara to the Mediterranean, and muted colors fading into unplayable lands, what you expect from Axis and Allies. But a closer look reveals the flaws. Endless straight lines, imaginary units, lazy naming, unrealistic geography, overcrowding, and impractical proportions. Yeah, the nostalgia fades quickly. We'll dive into all that soon, but first, Italy. See, Italy and Gibraltar are special territories. They're where your purchased units sit until you're ready to board them to a convoy. So, these two territories should have some sort of distinction. A simple gold ring around the nationality marker? Now, Gibraltar is tiny, so I get the stacking limit of 2. But what about Italy? Remember when we assumed the reason for stacking limits on North African territories was because of the extreme conditions? Well, Italy's a big country, no deserts or extreme heat, with loads of people and infrastructure. So why, oh why, does it have a default stacking limit of only 8? But let's shift focus for a moment to this, Malta, a small but crucial island for the British. Notice the black ring around it. Its value of 15 points, a stacking limit of 3, and that Maltese cross above the 15. Malta Maltese Cross. I like that. It showcases the hardships of this island during World War II by making it mandatory to spend a supply token from Malta to cash in on its 15 reinforcement points. The reinforcement points are counted and then spent at the beginning of your turn, kinda like you do in Risk. But there's one more thing about Malta: the black circle around it. You'll find the same one around Gibraltar. It's a containment circle, meaning anything within it is stationed there. The problem? It looks incredibly tacky and disrupts the map's flow. It's as if the designer gave up on getting the proportions right and just fumbled a Sharpie. These two locations just need to be larger. Sacrificing a bit of historical accuracy for better gameplay and aesthetics wouldn't hurt, especially if it means no magic marker. Are you as fascinated as I am by board games that are slightly misshapen for better gameplay and aesthetics? Like what they did with the board in A&A World War I, 1914. But back to North Africa and the terrible map. It gets worse. And then it gets much worse. Look at these middle territories in Africa. They seem large enough for gameplay, but even with the 8-unit stack limit, they get impossibly congested, especially when borders are packed with landmines and you're trying to separate combat and non-combat units as the rules instructed. I do love the clean feeling of how city names substitute the territory names. It's refreshing and clever, but you know what's not clever? The alphabet soup labels on the Sahara Desert territories. ABCs? Really? Something like longitude and latitude coordinates would have looked far more cohesive and impressive. Let's focus on the sea for a minute, because there's something even more revolting than singing your ABCs in the middle of the Sahara Desert. Since the beginning of Axis Allies, sea zones have been defined by straight lines. They actually look pretty good, especially when contrasted with the unpredictable political borders of the land territories. And to be 100 with you, that contrast is one of the reasons why I love A&A maps. I even have a spin-off version hanging in my dining room. So if we look at North Africa, the coastal territorial lines aren't terrible. And yes, I understand some straight lines will emerge in barren lands, but just look at all of these endless squares. A grid. Like Scrabble. Really? It makes the land territories look like sea zones. But it's an ocean of sand. Nope. I do not accept. The only argument that might maybe fit is that it possibly makes organizing landmines easier, but it feels lazy, disjointed, disloyal to Axis and allies, and incredibly off-putting. This isn't checkers, and if I wanted to play on a grid, I'd have just played a Hex War Simulator. But wait, yep, you guessed it, it gets even worse. These 3 convoy zones in the bottom right, they're supposed to represent reinforcements coming from the Atlantic, around the bottom of Africa, into the Indian Ocean, and then up through the Suez Canal. Okay, I understand, but just look at them. These 3 sea zones are half molded into this side of Africa, and the other half floating above the Sinai Peninsula. What the utter F is going on here? This looks absolutely atrocious. Come on! This is the worst Axis and Allies map I've ever seen. But we're not even done yet. Convoys are an essential part of this game, and these national markers in the middle of the sea represent that. Depending on your allegiance, place your markers to represent you've activated a convoy when you control the port the convoy is docking at. Okay, I'm with you so far. A convoy transports your troops and supplies to the battlefield. Okay, but there's no transport ship pieces in the box like you get with other A&A games. Correct. Instead, you're gonna have to conjure up images of boats and large canoes in your mind to act as transports in the convoy. Wait, what? The convoy is imaginary? So where do I put my units that are supposed to be transported to the mainland? Oh, yeah. Just place them in the sea. Pretend they're on the transports. So what happens if my convoy gets attacked or hit by a mine? Well, you'll just fantasize that every 2 units make up one of those invisible fairy tale transports, and if the enemy sinks it, then you pick one unit and the enemy player picks the other, and you'll both just, for real, assume those 2 units non-fictionally got dead. Unless your invisible transports slipped away at the last second, rescuing 2 units. Oh, what? Okay, we're in too deep on this imaginary, unseen, transporting invisible convoy thing to stop now. So, convoy transports can imaginarily escape while actual enemy units are shooting at them? How do I show which make-believe oversized canoe slipped away if everything is a fantasy in the middle of the sea? Ah, well, Easy. You just examine the currently way too small C-zone that's way too crowded and somehow slide 2 units further into the sea to show that they temporarily slipped away on their mythological dreamed up transports. Seriously? Seriously? It's too much. It's just too much. This feels so unreal and hollow. Like I'm stacking make-believe on top of make-believe. Add in that this is almost impossible to follow as a first-time player. Not to mention it almost obliterates any in-game immersion you may have had up until this point. It's almost embarrassing. I've got a fix for the convoy, but to add insult to the injury of everything being way too small, literally half of this map is unplayable lands with exclusion stripes everywhere. Listen, we've got islands, territories, and sea zones being too small. Convoys are too imaginary, the Suez Canal is too much of an abomination, and you can't even play half the lands on this map. But don't you worry. I've got a non-imaginary, very real way of solving them all in one simple move. Reframing the map. But before showing you what the map should look like, let's tally our game discoveries. How many distinguished finds and complete game blunders did we find in Axis Allies North Africa? And is this game still worth playing? For our total distinguished finds in ANA North Africa, we got, drumroll please, 14, which is a decent amount. To put that in context, most games don't get past 5, and the legendary strategy/Eurogame Scythe only had slightly more. Just to be clear, it's not how many good versus how many bad. The numbers represent very different things. Every game has mistakes, but not every game has exceptional finds. So 14 of them? And for the moment everybody's been waiting for, how many complete game blunders did we discover in ANA North Africa? 35, which honestly is slightly more than I thought it would be. But, once again, there will always be mistakes. The kicker here, none of these mistakes break the iconic feeling of playing an Axis and Allies game. So count yourself lucky, as it's not nearly as bad as Risk Warhammer 40k, which hits the triple digits bad. And now, to answer the question everyone has been wondering this entire video, is ANA North Africa still worth playing? I haven't played Axis and Allies in a long while, so sitting down to this one, whew! I felt it all flooding back to me. Now, if you're an ANA fan, then you're gonna love this game. So yes, absolutely, buy it. Oh, and if you're new to Axis and Allies, then there's a link in the description where you should be getting started. It's definitely not this version. That's for like Christmas next year or something. So now that we know all the good and the bad and who should be playing, let's take a look at what they should be playing on. If you remember, we've got islands, territories, and sea zones being too small. Convoys are too imaginary, the Suez Canal is too much of an abomination, and you can't even play half the lands on this map. Let's start with mainland Africa, leaving it mostly untouched, but everything else changes. The northern half of the board moves up, reducing unplayable lands and making room for larger sea zones and convoys across the Mediterranean. Which leads us to this, the Suez Canal. It's been widened to accommodate those 3 atrocious-looking, half part of and half floating above, convoy sea zones. Now looking at Gibraltar, which got much bigger, no longer needing that black Sharpie containment circle around it. Now over to Malta, the unsinkable aircraft carrier. It doesn't need a black circle, it just needs to be bigger. Ah, looking much better. But there's one more thing besides larger sea zones that could help players with their imaginary convoys. The transports being printed directly on the board. Simply place your units on the graphics to keep things organized. Then, instead of sliding units all over sea zones to signify a transport slipping away from combat, just slide them down to this handy slip-away graphic. Oh my god. We did it, people. I think this is where the map should have started. But there's something else going on here. Something that Axis and Allies didn't do to their fan base. I would say betrayal, but I don't think that word is strong enough. Cause in this next video, I break down every backstab, deception, and treasonous act found in Risk Warhammer 40k. There's a buttload, and just between you and me, it's like they ruined it on purpose.